Happy Thursday morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Tropical MBA podcast, where we help you build a 6, 7, 8, or beyond figure business from your laptop, from anywhere. That's the promise. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the podcast, boss man.
I was just thinking about that. Like, you got a business so big, you got to turn your phone sideways so the calculator has enough zeros. That's the type of business that we're talking about here.
Yeah, we're going landscape mode today. One of the ways you can do that, we're going to talk about how to improve your pipeline by 20 to 50% overnight. Quite literally overnight, not hyperbole. We'll get into that. We're going to talk about a business idea I have for anybody doing media on the web. So I want to do a live workshop with you, and I haven't prepped you that much. So we'll end the episode with that. First, I want to jump into some business ideas here at the top that was inspired by a talk we were having about taxes. So the question is this, Ian, why is it hard for sizable businesses to be in love with their CPA? If you were to take a poll of the room at a DC Black event, these are founders who are doing a minimum of $1 million a year, sometimes in upwards of 8 figures. And a lot of the feedback that they have about their relationship with their CPA is pretty meh. And I think this is interesting. I don't think it needs to be like this. And I think this represents an enormous business opportunity for founders. Like, how do you grow a great business? You sell expensive things to people with a lot of money. Well, if you run a $3 million business, guess what? You have a lot of money, but you're not often satisfied with the level of professional services you're receiving. And the jigsaw puzzle doesn't take too long to pull apart, Ian. Like, when you look at like these highly talented professionals like a CPA, they're not incentivized enough to sit down with somebody who owns a $2 million business and dig through the details to find optimization strategies. So what ends up happening, they charge a reasonable figure annually to essentially sign off on a good enough strategy, and you get it over the fence, taxes are filed, the founder wishes you could have done more, but isn't really willing to pay the big dollars that these premium CPAs are charging high net worth clients to do this. And so you've got this situation where you've got this messy middle. And I do think that there's just enormous amount of opportunity in this space to leverage AI, systems, group delivery to build profitable services businesses that really target this group of founders, $1 million to $10 million businesses.
So like you said, you have like a $3 million business. You're trying to get some kind of tax optimization or strategy going on. And a lot of times, all you can kind of get in terms of the attention of the CPA is enough for them to kind of file your taxes, right?
Correct.
So, quarterly planning, this and that, either extra or they don't have time for it. And the reason is pretty clear. If you own any kind of agency like this, you take $2,000 to $5,000 a year from your clients. Hopefully you have a couple hundred of them. And your strategy is basically to talk to them as little as possible, because every time you talk to them, it costs you money and you can't service and figure out how to grow your business. So, a lot of people, their strategy is to try and find somebody maybe that doesn't want to make a multi-million-dollar company out of having a CPA office, right? So you find somebody.
Yeah, you find like a lifestyle CPA.
Yeah.
You become friends with them. They know about the fact that you're going to get married. They know about the fact that you purchased this or that, or that you hired this team this way, and they can get into the details with you because they're cutting their teeth on your relationship.
Correct. Yeah. So you find somebody that's invested in you personally, or maybe you find somebody, like you said, that's like starting off maybe early on in their journey as a CPA. And so you get a little bit more of their attention. Generally speaking, I think in these relationships too, you do get more attention upfront. Because, if you're a CPA, I think most of the time you're looking at your clients from a lifetime value of somewhere between 5 to 10 years, right? Like, it's kind of a painful thing to switch away from. Most people don't take the time to do it. And so I think most of these CPAs, upfront, they basically figure that that's the case, right? And then they invest in the relationship early. So meaning they take a lot of your calls in the beginning. And then as time goes on, things kind of fade, but you're kind of locked in. And it's kind of like you said, meh, so they get it over the fence at the end of the year. My things get filed. I think, this all leads to like kind of probably like a meh on both sides. The CPA is like meh and the business owner is meh.
I think you've nailed it. So then the question is, where's the opportunity here for people listening along at home? I think the opportunity exists in some kind of group delivery, community delivery, or detailed onboarding with AI analysis, right? So you are using a group delivery or a community delivery or these onboarding process. Say, for example, you sign up for a sprint or a regular mastermind group or some kind of workshop that touches base every quarter. And my onboarding requirement is that I fill out a detailed form for 1 hour. Now the service provider then does an AI analysis, and you do some kind of group delivery where businesses that are similar are grouped together and people are sharing their tips. And so they're skilling up faster and not doing it isolated and alone without any facts about the business. And so this could be done in a lot of different niches. This is why I want to bring it up. It could be people who are searching for businesses to buy. It could be done in pricing and packaging tune-up. So for example, consulting, like you have some kind of consultant who comes in, does the 1 hour onboarding community delivery of, let's take a look at your pricing. Let's take a look at your packaging. This is what a traditional consultant would do, but now we're lowering the cost and we're giving the customer a better chance at ROIing. So the reason that I think a lot of founders don't invest more in these services because their upside, their like expected value is what they would invest in the service, right? It's like, I know I can save 30 grand in the next 2 years in taxes if I spend X amount of time on this. The problem is to hire somebody to save me the 30 grand would cost 30 grand.
Right.
And so the opportunity for people listening along at home is to improve that delta. Well, what if I could join a group or a sprint or a diagnostic service that costs me 5 grand or less, that promises to save me 30 grand. And hey, it's fun along the way. I learned something, I skill up, and now I know it for the rest of my life. If you have some kind of product like that, there is always like the few percentage point companies who do break out, who do get to 8 figures and beyond. And now all of a sudden they become your premium one-on-one clients. So you could do this in insurance and real estate, compliance and risk. Here's an interesting one that comes up in our inboxes all the time. What about partnership specialists? Someone who comes in and does partnership diagnostics, does an onboarding, helps people deal with buy-sell clauses. There's just all these little areas and facets of businesses that I feel like these entrepreneurs in the middle, DC Black folks, we're raising our hands. We're kind of left behind by a lot of these premium service providers. There's just so much space and so much opportunity here. So people who are looking for business ideas, I really think that this area here, services for $1 to $10 million businesses, there's so much that we need. We've got the dry powder to invest, but we just can't step up to that premium level of 101, the big law firm, the big CPA. We need something that's tailored to our needs. So that's my business opportunity of the week.
Yeah, you asked me before the call, how much would I pay for this? Thousands of dollars a year.
Yeah,
for sure.
There you go. Okay, next topic, Ian. Can you improve your pipeline by 20 to 50% overnight? Harvard Business Review thinks so. So we covered this book by Frank Slootman called Amp It Up. And it's this idea of just intensity and really having a culture that's like a sports team. You know, you're running towards the goal line every week. The reality for so many people listening to this podcast is that our businesses are essentially cultureless. And this is a term that I learned from Laura Roeder, and I have to have her speak it for herself. But my interpretation of a cultureless business is one that is very transactional. It's one that is based on SOPs. I pay you this money. Here is the scorecard. Here is the scope of the project. Now go do it.
Right.
And don't bug me too much about it. We're not going to have a company party. We're not wearing t-shirts. I read the 4-Hour Work Week. This is what we're doing. My culture is a personal culture. The business culture is to make money and shut up, right? Okay, so that's the context. How can we leverage this concept of amping it up, of intensity, in order to get ahead while maybe we don't have sort of this sports team vibe around the office? And I think one answer to that is to focus a lot of intellectual energy around an area of the company that a transaction can make an enormous difference. And a candidate area is engagement of new leads. In one study I pulled down from the internet, Ian, 23% of companies do not respond to internet leads. HBR, Harvard Business Review, found that responding within 1 hour makes you 7 times more likely to have a meaningful conversation. And as you let that time draw out, the decay continues to increase. So here we can take an amp it up philosophy to our leads. I'm willing to bet, if you're listening along at home, that you do not respond to every lead within 1 hour. And a similar study said you could improve your pipeline by 20 to 50%. Now, you still got to close. That's a separate thing. I'm just talking about the bare basics, which is just get back to them. Here's the point. Let's all commit to responding to every lead in our business within 15 minutes. I'm talking business hours. I'm talking after hours. I'm talking 24/7. Let's amp it up. Let's make a culture of responding to leads within 15 minutes. And I want to see how much money the TMBA community can create. We have experimented with this concept. We've been toying around with it, and you can see it right away. It's just like this big, obvious thing. What if this is like every single time a lead comes into the business, it is literally a fire drill to respond within 15 minutes? What say you, boss man?
Well, I'm thinking back to the early days when we had an office in San Diego and we had phones, and people would call us to make orders on our physical products. This was, early days of making sales on the internet. There were expensive products, and oftentimes when people want to buy expensive products, even today, folks, they want to talk to somebody. So the phone would ring. Every time the phone rang, like, you did not miss the call.
Right.
And then if someone left a message, you got back to them within like 5 minutes. Because what are they going to do when they don't talk to somebody? They're going to go to the next person, meaning the next company. We had a serious sense of urgency around this because we knew how valuable it was. And every time we didn't pick up the phone, it was like losing thousands of dollars. I think what's happened, obviously, and we used to make fun of people back in the day. These kids, they don't know how to answer the phone. They're like scared to be on the phone. Everybody started building these, quote, passive businesses or whatever you want to call it with the internet. And it's like, if you didn't buy and you didn't click immediately, you were kind of dead to them. I'm not going to get on the phone. Like I'm on a plane to the Philippines or whatever. If you can't figure out how to get to my website and purchase, like, I don't want you as a customer. So fast forward though today, and I think the study at Harvard Business Review is telling, and I think the way that we're operating our businesses is probably wrong. Meaning we have biased too much towards this like passive website. Like, look, I did all the work up front. I wrote all this marketing material. I wrote all this copy. It's clear as day. Read the FAQs. If you can't find your way to my buy now button, I don't want you as a customer. But the reality is you do. There's a massive percentage of people that you're missing out on because you're not following up with your leads. So I experimented with some texting this week. I experimented with some emails this week. I got on a call with somebody, and it turns out that they didn't want to buy our product. That happens. What do most people do in that situation? They hang up the phone, and then they go about their day. What is the right thing to do in that situation?
Downsell.
Exactly. Downsell. Send them an email, tell them all the reasons why you're going to keep in touch with them, all the reasons why you're thinking about them still, and then you email them a week later, a month later, whatever it is in your sequence, right? That's the hardest email to send, though, is like basically when you've been rejected and now you have to follow up with somebody. But here's the good news. It's super valuable if you can stand to do it. Those are the types of emails and phone calls that will either convert them a day later or two, depending on what you say, or in the future. Yep. So, look, I think that sales is a tough skill, right? It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of rejection. But to your point, how much are you leaving on the table by not doing it?
If you just simplify your business, there's two moments that are the most important in the customer journey. It's when they enter and it's when they leave. And if you want to make more money today, if you want to increase your pipeline or your revenue by 20 to 50%, it's like bucking up and going back into when are they coming in and how thoughtful and skillful is this process. The first thing you do is you ramp up the velocity. We're getting back to everybody within 30 seconds, 1 minute. Forget about the 15 minute. We're optimizing a system here. We're systems thinkers. We want to have a systematized business. And the way you do that is you get your hands dirty and you feel the system. So you want to test the limit. That means let's respond within 10 seconds and see what happens. Let's test this limit. Maybe it's the same as 15 minutes, and then that would be more affordable. What's interesting about this is like you can reduce your costs dramatically too, because what's better, an expensive salesperson talking to a lead who's 7 days old, or a account manager who's responding within 1 minute? Mm-hmm. Well, that's an opportunity for us all to figure out, you know?
I think it's a natural thing to do to kind of get lazy about this stuff, unless you're completely laser focused on it. You might have all the leads you need to fulfill your revenue dreams or your goals. Like,
by the way, that's the name of our next band is Revenue Dreams.
But you might just not be executing on those leads, right? So it's like, well, we're like carving out more marketing budget and like we're doing all these things externally. Hold on a second. We got the 100 leads a month that we need. Our problem is conversions. We're not closing them. Why aren't we closing them?
Right.
And so before you go out and spend a bunch more money on marketing and whatnot, I do think that this is a call to action, you know, in terms of like, who do we have in the pipeline? How are they getting addressed? What are their objections? Why are they not converting? Et cetera, et cetera.
All right, Ian, final topic. I teased at the top of the episode that we would brainstorm an idea. There's a counterintuitive concept for service business owners, and here it is. If there's two conferences to go to, and Conference A has a bunch of your ideal client profile, and Conference B has a bunch of other businesses like yours, which conference would you think is the more profitable conference to go to?
I'm really bad at trick questions.
Typically, the better result will be to go to the conference where you're with a bunch of other businesses like yours. Why? If you go to the conference with a bunch of ICPs, an ICP isn't always ready to buy your product or your service. Now, we compare that with Conference B, where you have a bunch of other agencies or service providers like yours who are talking to ICPs all year long. They have deep relationships with the ICPs. And so what ends up happening is you create a cabal or a partnership with complementary agencies, right? So a lot of the sales that we get for remote first recruiting are from DC members who are talking to clients for hours on end or doing projects with them. And the client says, hey, I need to hire somebody in Latin America. Do you know anybody? And they're like, yeah, of course. I went to Conference B and I hung out with these guys who own a recruiting agency, remotefirstrecruiting.com. Just go over there. They'll take care of you. So this is how this stuff works. It becomes very effective. If you think about the total spend and the amount of time that all these companies like yours are deploying every year to have these conversations, you can actually leverage that if you have good relationships with these partner agencies. Okay, this brings me to content. Now, We are both fans of the My First Million podcast. It's one of the best business podcasts that exists. And the way that it came about is pretty interesting and I think could be inspiring for a lot of founders that are creating content. My understanding of the way the podcast came about, Sam Parr runs The Hustle, has this podcast, My First Million. HubSpot acquires the podcast, ends up paying the hosts, Sam and Sean, quite a bit of money to continue doing the podcast under the HubSpot flag. Couple things interesting about this. HubSpot, I'm just guessing, they understand the power of the influence equation, which is, hey, we're not just doing marketing via landing pages, via content on our website. Now our prospective customers are spending hours a week in the HubSpot universe because they're listening to long form content that is presented by HubSpot. Now, if you look at the idea of creating content under this context of having a big financial backer, now you're incentivized to work really, really hard on that content every week. Why? Because you're getting paid a lot, right? Mm-hmm. And now you can have a powerful team, a team that a lot of us bootstrappers in the $1 to $5 million range can't afford a couple producers or writers that are making six figures a year. But guess who can afford that? HubSpot. And so this got me thinking, Ian. I mean, there's so many founders that got a podcast, a YouTube channel, a Substack on the tip of their tongues. But to do it right, guess what? It doesn't quite cost 30 grand a year plus my time. It actually probably costs a few six figures a year. Well, who could afford that? And the interesting thing is the list of companies that could afford that and financially benefit from that is enormous. So going back to the My First Million story, what's very interesting about it is HubSpot gets premium ad placement. Everybody knows the podcast is HubSpot on the top of your mind while you're participating in this community and this content. But then the hosts occasionally will get to mention their projects. So there's a win-win situation here where, and this is why I brought up the Conference A, Conference B thing, is both partners can get the result that they want from the same audience, right? You can have two service providers and one ICP. I think the constraint for these large brokerages, these large platforms, these large services is finding the talent. It's very hard to find a writer, a podcaster, a YouTube presenter who can keep people coming back. But if you can do that, if you can crack that code, it's enormously valuable for the brand. And if you're listening to this at home, you might very well be that talent, right? That's often why we're in business, because of the way we write, of the way we speak, of the way we present our ideas. So Ian, my idea for your consideration is, could it be a win-win where founders that run services companies, run product companies are getting big budgets for their media apparatus because they are partnering with larger brands who ultimately can cash flow a $500,000 annual budget in terms of media? Because we're seeing people come out like a Hormozy who's saying, I'm spending $1 million plus a year on my personal brand. For a lot of us, we can't come up with that budget. But guess who can? Notion, give me a call, man. We use you every day.
I was going to say, when is this a pitch for Notion?
You know where this came from, Ian? I want to tip you off on this. We were saying that there's almost no job that we would take right now. And then when you said that, I was like, but what about if Notion paid us to podcast? It's like, this is like the job we might do.
You might get hired by Notion to start a podcast. But I think what you're proposing is a little bit more interesting here, which is if you've got the chops to have a podcast or you have a podcast that's established, why not basically co-brand it? Could be YouTube or newsletters or any kind of media really that you have. But, on its own, the podcast might not be worth anything. So, selling your podcast to Notion might not be a good idea. But partnering for a year or two in a contract, that might be a great deal for them. The other thing that you brought up is, founders having a podcast on the tip of their tongue. You used to famously try and get everyone to start a podcast that you met. There was like a 2-year period of your life where basically it was your mission to tell everybody to start a podcast. Correct. And then I think people started making fun of you and you backed off on it a little bit. But I do think in general it was good advice. The reality from what I saw, though, from that 2-year period,
Quietly, I'll mention it. It'll come out after a couple drinks. I'll be like, you should start a podcast.
the reality of that social experiment or whatever was that only 1% started the podcast. And from that 1%, 20 episodes in, it kind of got dropped. And I think there's a good reason for that. Number one is it takes an enormous amount of energy, passion, et cetera, et cetera. Number two, it didn't necessarily relate directly to sales, and it's a long-term project, and they either ran on a budget or passion for it, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times it's hard for founders to directly capitalize on the time and energy that they're going to spend on this podcast. Like, you need an expensive product, you got to be in the game for a long time, a million different reasons.
I think one of the reasons is that for non-media oriented brands, so like for a Notion, it's not like primarily a media company, right? They didn't start as like a YouTube conglomeration or whatever. I think it's very hard for their marketing departments to do media first content. Okay. So they focus on more traditional marketing. And then you will see, like, for example, I Googled a large brokerage that did like 25 podcasts and then petered out. I think it's very difficult for like someone on the board or the founding team or a high level operator in that company to reasonably be expected to show up every week and spend hours, like a day or more of their week creating podcast media. You could also make the case that they should exactly be doing that, but meanwhile, they're working on a big deal, right? And so I can understand the conflict that happens in that company, and that's where we come in, right? That's where the founders listening to this come in, is like, could you not pitch them on this partnership? We also thought of this because we started selling podcast sponsorships again. So shout out Smash Digital, shout out SPP.co. And there's this next level of partnership, which is like presented by, right? Like the TMBA is presented by Notion or whatever. And then there's this like next level of thing, which is like, why don't we just create a media partnership where I create the podcast for Notion, you pay me a bunch of money to do it, and oh, by the way, I still run my business and I can mention that on the show. So anyway, that's the idea. I think it's interesting. We're seeing some people do it. I think we're going to see more of this. I just got a spidey sense that we're going to see more of this in the near future. So that's it.
Great idea.
We covered a lot of business ideas. We talked about innovating on the delivery for $1 to $10 million businesses, for professional services. It's long been a theme on the show. I still think it's wide open. There's tons of great businesses to be built there. We talked about amping up your pipeline by responding quicker. HBR, they say 20 to 50% overnight. You will see a better pipeline by simply responding faster. Just do a little Googling about the literature. Is so compelling there. It could be the easiest way to improve your business is just to reply faster and just to remove all the objections to why your team, why your system cannot respond faster. And then we talked about brand partnerships for content. Isn't an opportunity in 2025? Maybe we'll take it for a walk and see what we can find there. That's it. You got a race this weekend, man. You got to get out of here. You got to put on the fire suit.
All right, Dan. Yeah, I got to put on the fire suit. Speaking of which, it's getting a little tight. I got a cool with the chips and dip, but I already told you I'm having some struggles over here. The good news is that my favorite chip company in the world, Siete Chips, the most amazing chips in the world, got sold to Pepsi. And of course, the chips taste different now and the texture is different. So my favorite chips in the world are gone thanks to,
It's a lucky break.
Exactly. So I'm just walking away. I'm backing up like Homer into the hedges on the Siete chips, hoping that this solves my problem.
All right, man. Good luck in the race. We'll see you next Thursday morning, as always. Thanks for joining us.